What do Japanese people really say about Singapore? Oh, you'll love this, because it's the kind of gossip that sounds smart only if you've never left your own island. You see, the Japanese will tell you Singapore is just a small country. They'll say it's boring, too clean, a shopping mall pretending to be a nation. And they laugh at how Singaporeans only have one season, hot and humid. Sounds savage, right? Except, here's the part that makes me choke on my matcha latte. Japan is literally 4 seasons of suffering. Summer, humid like Singapore, but with bonus cicadas screaming in your ear like unpaid interns. Winter, not elegant snow, it's slushy grey ice puddles that swallow your $300 Uniqlo boots. Spring, pollen bombs. Autumn, mosquito festivals. Congratulations, Japan, you bought 4 seasons, and all of them are trash. Meanwhile, Singaporeans are out there with year-round t-shirts, efficient public transport, and oh, an economy that actually works. But sure, keep calling it just a shopping mall, while half your population is stuck shopping for jobs that don't exist. And here's the kicker. The Japanese love to mock Singapore's small land size. Tiny island, no space, they say. But, excuse me? Tokyo apartments are basically mouse cages with rent so high you need a second job just to afford a second pillow. If Singapore is a shoebox, Japan is the shoebox inside the shoebox. So today, we're not just exposing what Japanese really say about Singapore, we're holding up the mirror. Because when you compare their complaints to their own reality, oh, it gets painfully funny. Stay tuned till the end, because I'll show you the one criticism Japan makes about Singapore that actually backfires so hard it deserves its own comedy special. Let's start with the classic Japanese commentary about Singapore. They roll their eyes and say, Singapore. Ah, yes, the country with no culture, just malls, laws, and fines. Then they sip their Starbucks in Shibuya, surrounded by 50 chain stores selling the same beige tote bag, and genuinely believe they're the guardians of true Asian culture. To many Japanese, Singapore is like that rich cousin who's too disciplined to be fun. Everything there is clean, efficient, and robotic, they say, as if cleanliness and efficiency were flaws. You'd think they prefer trains that arrive late and public toilets that smell like 1987. And my favourite, Singapore has no soul. Excuse me, coming from a country where a 7-Eleven rice ball is considered lunch and izakaya after work is the only form of therapy, the irony could power the entire Changi airport. They complain Singapore is too strict, too safe, too organised. Meanwhile, Japan is the global gold medalist in paperwork and hierarchy. You need 5 Hanko stamps to buy a phone, 3 meetings to apologise for existing, and a full year to get a raise smaller than your train fare. But somehow, Singapore's rules are authoritarian, while Japan's are tradition. Translation, we like control, just not when someone else is better at it. The funniest part, when Japanese travellers come back from Singapore, they always say, everything was expensive. Yes, welcome to the reality of not being subsidised by your parents at age 38. The truth is, Singapore's cost matches its income. Japan's cost matches its delusion. So when Japan laughs at Singapore for being too sterile, too rich, too strict, what they're really saying is, we wish we could make rules that actually work. Ask an average Japanese person about Singapore, and you'll hear the same recycled cliches, like a broken NHK documentary stuck in 1999. Singapore? It's just a shopping mall with a flag. Everything there is artificial. No nature, no art, no culture, just capitalism. Beautiful theories, until you realize Japan's own identity now revolves around vending machines, konbini food, and anime mascots explaining tax returns. Let's start with the shopping mall stereotype. Yes, Singapore has malls. But so does Japan, more malls than marriages these days. The difference? Singapore's malls are full of working people spending earned money. Japan's are full of window shoppers comparing 7-Eleven curry prices, because wages haven't moved since the iPhone 3G. Next, Singapore is artificial. This one's a gem. It usually comes from people living in Tokyo's man-made islands, drinking imported water, surrounded by neon lights and fake sakura petals that bloom earlier every year because of global warming. Japan literally manufactures its own seasons, but Singapore's artificial. And the favourite, Singapore has no culture. Sure, if you define culture only as wearing kimono once a year while eating convenience store sushi. In Singapore, culture isn't a museum exhibit. It's living, breathing, messy multiculturalism. Malay drums, Tamil festivals, Chinese hawker stalls, British legal logic, all functioning under one humid sky without stabbing each other over whose god is superior. That's not artificial. That's civilization. Then there's Singaporeans only care about money. Yes, because they can actually use it. In Japan, saving money feels like filling a leaking bucket. The yen drops faster than your job security. Singaporeans invest, own property, and plan retirement. Japanese people buy character-themed credit cards and call it financial literacy. Every Japanese stereotype about Singapore reveals not Singapore's flaws, but Japan's hidden envy. Because behind every no culture or too strict jab is one unspoken fear. Singapore shows what Japan could have been if it had evolved instead of aging gracefully into mediocrity. To understand why Japanese people talk down to Singapore, you have to understand Japan's favourite pastime, feeling superior without evidence. It's a national sport. For decades, Japan has seen itself as the elder brother of Asia, the refined mentor who once modernized its noisy neighbors through, well, let's just call it unsolicited colonial consulting. So when Japan looks at Singapore, a tiny island that somehow became richer, safer, and better managed, it triggers an identity crisis. How can they do that without us? Simple, by not being you. Japan's pride runs on nostalgia. We were once the world's second largest economy. Yes, once. Like saying, I was hot in high school. Singapore, on the other hand, quietly built a 21st century system while Japan was still debating fax machines. In the Japanese mind, small equals insignificant. It's a hangover from empire days, the idea that power requires land, armies, and flags planted on someone else's beach. Singapore flipped that logic. Zero land, maximum brain. That's why it bothers Japan. Singapore wins using intelligence, not inheritance. You'll often hear Japanese say, Singapore is efficient but cold. Translation, they do things better than us, and it hurts my feelings. Because in Japan, inefficiency is romanticized. Long meetings, slow decisions, handwritten forms, these aren't problems, they're traditions. Meanwhile, Singapore just built an app and moved on. And there's another hidden layer, envy, disguised as critique. When Japanese office workers see Singaporeans buying condos in their 30s, flying to Europe without begging for vacation approval, and retiring before arthritis sets in, they label it soulless materialism. Because in Japan, suffering equals virtue. Happiness is suspicious. Ultimately, Japan's condescension towards Singapore is less about Singapore and more about Japan's refusal to update its software. Singapore represents the future Japan could have led, but didn't. So instead of admitting that, Japan rewrites the narrative. Singapore is too perfect, too mechanical, too robotic, which, ironically, sounds exactly like Japan describing itself in a mirror. Now let's flip the camera around, because Singaporeans have opinions too. And trust me, they're not impressed. When you ask a Singaporean what they think of Japan, you'll often get a polite smile first, because Singaporeans are diplomatic. But once the filter comes off, oh boy, they'll say things like, Japan looks clean, but it smells like old carpet. Or, they bow a lot, but can't communicate. And my favourite, The trains are on time, but the people aren't. You see, Singaporeans admire Japan's aesthetics, but laugh at its logic. The country that invented bullet trains still requires fax machines for government paperwork. A society obsessed with perfection can't even raise birth rates. It's like watching a robot have an emotional breakdown. To Singaporeans, Japan feels outdated, like Windows XP with cherry blossoms, beautiful wallpaper, terrible system performance, and the politeness. Singaporeans find it exhausting. In Japan, you can spend 10 minutes apologizing before you get to the point. In Singapore, you say, can do or not, and move on. Efficiency, performance art. When Japanese tourists visit Singapore, they often marvel at how modern and global it feels. Meanwhile, Singaporeans visiting Japan notice something else: how slow everything actually is. The queues, the forms, the unnecessary layers of ritual to order a coffee. Singaporeans aren't impressed by Boeing, they're impressed by speed. Then there's the irony. Japanese people think Singapore is too money-minded, but Singaporeans think Japan is bad at money. Who saves coins in piggy banks in 2025? Who still believes in lifetime employment when no one's hiring full-time anymore? For Singaporeans, Japan is like that elegant friend who still lives with their parents, impeccably dressed, endlessly polite, but financially dependent. Japan built a brand of dignity. Singapore built a reality that works. And here's the quiet truth: Singaporeans don't hate Japan. They just outgrew the illusion. The sushi's still great, the temple's still pretty, but the myth of Japan as the model Asian nation, that expired along with the Walkman. From the outside, watching Japan and Singapore is like watching two exes who both think they're winning the breakup. Japan still believes it's the cultural darling of Asia: tea ceremonies, cherry blossoms, Ghibli dreams. Meanwhile, Singapore quietly became the banker of the region, the adult who actually pays the bills, while Japan reminisces about how great things were in the 80s. To global observers, Japan is the museum piece. Charming, beautifully maintained but frozen in time. It's where tourists go to feel safe, pretending the modern world doesn't exist. Singapore, on the other hand, is the showroom model: sleek, futuristic, a little too polished. It's where investors go to feel like capitalism still works. Japan sells nostalgia, Singapore sells stability, and both are addicted to their brands. Foreigners often describe Japan as authentic, but what they really mean is predictable. You know what you're getting: politeness, efficiency, and mild emotional repression. Singapore, by contrast, gets called soulless, but it's only soulless if your idea of a soul is standing in line for 3 hours to eat ramen in the rain. Western journalists love to romanticize Japan as the land of craftsmanship and graceful decline. Translation: we love how you're collapsing, but tastefully. When they write about Singapore, it's always the authoritarian success story. Translation: you're doing better than us, and that makes us uncomfortable. From the global viewpoint, Japan is the dream that refuses to wake up. Singapore is the reality no one wants to admit works. Japan whispers about spirit, heritage, and emotion, while the lights flicker in half-empty shopping arcades. Singapore quietly counts GDP per capita higher than France, and still gets accused of being boring. So the world keeps consuming Japan's aesthetics while depositing money in Singapore's banks. One sells feelings, the other sells futures. One is a poem, the other is a spreadsheet. And maybe that's the most poetic thing of all. In the grand theatre of modern Asia, Japan plays the role of the melancholic artist, while Singapore plays the accountant who actually pays for the show. After all the teasing, mockery, and mutual eye-rolling, here's the truth. Japan and Singapore are like two overachieving cousins, both brilliant, both unbearable, and both secretly jealous of the other's report card. Japan looks at Singapore and thinks, they have money, but no soul. Singapore looks at Japan and thinks they have soul but no money. And both are right. Japan mastered emotion, art, humility, beauty, and imperfection. But that same obsession with harmony turned into paralysis. People don't speak up. Companies don't innovate. Everyone's polite, but no one's honest. Singapore mastered efficiency, logic, order, and results. But that same precision comes at a cost. People follow rules before asking if they make sense. Life is comfortable, but sometimes comfort is just a fancier word for boredom. If Japan could borrow Singapore's decisiveness, it might actually escape its endless economic Groundhog Day. If Singapore could borrow Japan's emotional depth, it might finally produce something beyond skyscrapers and Starbucks logos. The irony. They need each other. Japan needs a dose of Singapore's ruthlessness to survive the future. Singapore needs a touch of Japan's romance to remember why it's surviving. The global audience sees it clearly. Japan is the artist who refuses to sell out, starving nobly in a decaying gallery. Singapore is the consultant who sold everything, including the art, and built a luxury mall over the ruins. But in their own ways, they both represent the extremes of modern Asia. Japan, the soul that forgot how to scale. Singapore, the system that forgot how to feel. And maybe, just maybe, the future belongs not to either of them, but to whoever learns to blend beauty with efficiency, spirit with structure, and pride with purpose. So now we've come full circle. Japan, beautiful, nostalgic, emotionally rich, but stuck in yesterday. Singapore, efficient, disciplined, ruthlessly modern, but emotionally sterile. Both nations are mirrors reflecting each other's flaws and fantasies. And here's the uncomfortable question I'll leave you with. Would you rather live in a country that feels human but can't progress, or one that progresses but forgets how to feel human? That's the real debate hiding behind all the stereotypes, the envy, the mockery. Because the truth is, the rest of Asia doesn't laugh at Japan or Singapore. They fear becoming one of them, either trapped in nostalgia or trapped in perfection. Japan teaches us what happens when tradition wins over change. Singapore teaches us what happens when change wins over soul. And somewhere in between those two destinies is where the rest of us are desperately trying to survive. So before you type that angry comment about which one's better, ask yourself this. If you had to choose your future, would you rather be Japan, beautifully dying, or Singapore, perfectly alive but soulless? Drop your answer below. I'll be reading every comment, while sipping kopi in Singapore and watching Japan debate it for the next 10 years.